Hello, and welcome to the No Bad Questions podcast, where I try to learn in a conversational manner, to break down jargon, and to present the least amount of filtering as possible on a wide array of topics. I hope that you learn something too. If you do and want to support the podcast, you probably already know all the ways that you can do so. You can like, share, subscribe, hit the notifications, but ultimately, and what I hope you choose to do, is watch to the very end. With that, we'll start today's podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of No Bad Questions. I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Andrea Hulshult, who I probably butchered the pronunciation of, but I'm sure she'll correct me. She is the founder and chief agile officer of Boldly Agile LLC. She's a doctorate of education in career and technical education from the University of Wisconsin-Stout. She's over 20 years of experience in the information technology and software development sectors. Dr. Hulshult has spent the last 10 years of her career leading and coaching teams through agile transformations. Dr. Hulshult is an award-winning professor and researcher in the agile space. Her research focuses on using Agile in non-technical spaces to enhance processes, teams, culture, and outcomes. She focuses on higher education, where she was part of the team that created the Agile Manifesto for teaching and learning that is used by Agile professors around the globe as a guideline for Agile teaching. Dr. Hulshult's latest article was published in the Journal for the Society for Post-Acute and Long-Term Care Medicine, where she collaborated on research about applying Agile methodology to re-engineer the delivery of person-centered care in a nursing home. Dr. Andrea, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, and you said my name perfectly.
Okay, great. Well, that's always a good start to any podcast, is when you pronounce things correctly. So, what is Agile?
Well, depends on who you ask. Lots of people think it's a framework. Lots of people think it's a methodology, but I honestly believe that Agile is a mindset, and my favorite definition of Agile is from the International Consortium for Agile, and I'm just going to, I have it memorized, so I'm just going to say it here, but I see Agile, which is what they're called for short there, is that Agile is not a process, it's not a methodology, but it's a framework that welcomes uncertainty, that welcomes challenges, empowers individuals, and views failure as a learning opportunity. And then part two of that is adopting an Agile mindset unleashes the brilliance of people and teams, which enables rapid discovery and faster innovation. So it's a mindset. It's a way of thinking about work and a way of thinking about how to interact with your teammates.
Okay, so that is, I appreciate that breakdown. And particularly, I appreciate the breakdown that it's not a specific, that to your mind, it's a mindset. The definition there is a bit of a mouthful, if you will.
Yes.
And so one of the things that takes me back to when you just said that is I read a Harvard Business Review article a couple years ago where they took all these MBA students and they put them up against kindergartners to build like a spaghetti bridge. And the MBA students lost because the kindergartners were more willing to fail. The MBA students were, let's plan, and they didn't get time to do iterations of their spaghetti bridge or whatever it was, and it wouldn't work, or it held less weight, or whatever the competition was. But the kindergartners, they built something and it failed, and they iterated and it failed, and it iterated, but they weren't afraid of failure. So is that Agile mindset? Do those kindergartners have Agile mindset?
They absolutely do. And if you have to understand how and where Agile came from to really see how it's impacting how people and teams work. So think back, 80s, 90s, the main way to manage projects. And the Agile way of thinking was born out of the software development sector.
Okay.
And so if you think back to the 80s, the 90s, big ERP implementations, they all were done in Waterfall. So there's a
Which
project.
is the classic, for folks who don't know, Waterfall is
Yes.
sort of the classic project management methodology, where one thing at a time, this task has to go before that task, predecessors, successors, all these types of things, right? I mean, that's just to break down that terminology.
Right. So when you're in a waterfall project, the, customer, the project manager, the executives, they determine all of the requirements for the project or the product up front, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's passed down to the team, right? To the project lead, to the team. And they say, here's this book of like 300 pages. Here's what this software should have. Go build it. And then, the project lead or the project manager creates a beautiful piece of art in Microsoft Project. And you've got your plan for the next 9 months or a year, right? Mm-hmm. And then you get to the end of the project and you've spent the time and the budget, and you show it to your customer, and 9 out of 10 times they're like, oh, well, things have changed in 9 months since you've been working on it, especially in the world of software and tech, right? Sometimes mm-hmm. that stuff changes, overnight. Mm-hmm. And so customers were like, oh, well, now we're going to need this and this, or this isn't going to work for us because now we've had to change how we do business because our customers have had to change how they, work. And so here you are you've spent millions of bucks, right? And the software isn't what your customer wants. So what normally happens is the company who created the software has to spend more money to fix it because they don't want to ruin their reputation, right?
Right.
And so back in 2001, a group of software executives were on a ski trip because that's what software execs do. They were out in Utah on a ski trip, sitting around talking about this, talking about how do we keep software projects from failing and costing us so much more. And they wrote that weekend the Agile Manifesto. And it has 4 values and 12 principles. And I tell folks these 4 values guide your work. And I'll talk about those here in a sec. And the 12 Agile principles attached to the Agile Manifesto, they guide your mindset about how you think about work and how you think about interacting with your teammates. And because if you think about it, since we are in kindergarten, what are we told to do in school? Work in teams, get in a team, right. Find a group. We are never told how. We are never provided any tools, any tips, any guidelines for how you work in a successful team. Why do people hate working in teams? If you think about back to like being in high school and
because Billy doesn't pull his weight, that's why.
Yes, there's always one person that everybody wants to get because
right.
they're not pulling the weight, and there's no way to make them accountable. But if you adopt an Agile mindset, you really incorporate the Agile values and the 12 Agile principles along with a strong type of Agile. So let me back up. So Agile is a way of thinking, right? But there's all types of flavors of Agile, right? So when most companies transform or adopt into an Agile way of working, they adopt the mindset and then they pick one of those Agile flavors, like Scrum, XP, paired programming, Kanban, So along with that kind of Agile structure, which the Agile type flavor provides, it solves a lot of the problems that teams have with people not being held accountable. It helps with the work being transparent. It helps to encourage interaction and collaboration. And most Agile teams break work down into small increments, which cuts down on a company's risk, right? So if you're really only trying to build 2 weeks of a product or a project at a time, at the end of the two weeks, you meet with your customer and say, hey, here's, what we've built. What do you think? If they say, oh, you got it wrong, or, oh, we forgot to tell you that something changed in the past 2 weeks, you're going to have to start, over or make a change. Well, it's only 2 weeks of work. It's not 9 months worth of work.
Right. Now, is that what I've heard that? I think that's called a sprint. Is that correct? And so you said 2 weeks. Is that like a law of Agile? Because I feel like I've also heard organizations do 1 week, 1 day. I mean, I've heard all sorts of different iterations of sprint. So are people misusing Agile there? Or is Agile in that sense flexible as to a sprint time frame?
Right. That's a fantastic question. So the most popular type of Agile right now in the world is Scrum. And Scrum, it works in 2 week sprints. But to really have a successful Agile adoption, you really have to do what works best for your team and the type of work you do. So I have coached teams that do 2 week sprints, that do a month sprint, right? You have to find that sweet spot of, right, what works best for you and your customer. Most software development teams, they work in 2 week sprints. There are some software teams that they work in like a couple of days because they want to constantly push out something new, right? So you really have to find just what really works best for that team. Okay.
That all makes sense. So this is this new methodology, and I don't think it probably matters to anything, but my brain can't help but wonder if the Agile at the ski retreat, the creation of that was before or after the .com bubble burst in 2001. Just because, I don't know, something my brain kind of wonders the timing of that, but it probably doesn't matter to anything anywhere in the world. But so this is this new methodology. So is the old way dead? The waterfall way, is it dead? And I don't mean our organization's still using it, because I know for a fact they are.
Oh, yes.
What I mean is, I guess, should it be dead?
I think it depends. I think it depends on what the goals of the organization are, right? I am not the type of Agilist that says you have to do it this way or else, because that's not going to work for every team and every type of sector, right? Because you have to think about that. Yes, I take a lot of heat because people always say, well, Agile was born in software. It's all about software, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, that's where it started, because it solved a problem, right? It solved this problem of not having any customer feedback for months and months and months. It solved the problem of trying to course correct when it matters instead of at the end. It's kind, as a college professor, I hate end of the semester course evals. Why? Because I can't fix it. So
Right.
my entire class, if there was something that wasn't working for them, they have suffered the whole semester.
Right.
There's not a darn thing that I can do at that point to change the outcome and their experience in my class.
Right.
Right? So it's the same thought. Like, you have to stop and you have to reflect on the work. And that's part of those 12 Agile principles, is that, right? You want to stop, and the team talks about how it's, working for them, but then you also want to get that customer feedback, right? And what I've seen that I love about the Agile way of working is, like, after the end of a sprint, right? It could be a month, it could be two weeks. The team has created something, and then they go show it to their customer. And customers are over the moon. They're like, you did that in 2 weeks, or you created that in a month. Can I use that now? I know it's not perfect and we still need some tweaks, but can we have it now? Like, that team and that customer, right? They both have added value, right? And in the world that we are in, especially during COVID, post-COVID, I don't even know what you really call us right now, where we're at. We're still in it, right?
Right.
But things can change overnight, right? Like, if you think about how all of the companies that really kind of survived COVID, they quickly stood up, like curbside pickup, right? Like, they, quickly figured out how to get their products out, right? And so sometimes you have to have a way of working that allows that that built-in process to be able to quickly change. And that's what I love about the Agile way, because if it isn't working or it needs to change, well, then you can.
Yeah.
And for the next sprint.
Yeah, and I particularly appreciate your point about in the pandemic universe is perhaps how we'll phrase it, the need to be to change rapidly and to adapt rapidly. And in my universe in healthcare, I know that a lot of organizations in 2021 talked about retrospectively about 2020 as a year that they became agile, and I mean with a lowercase a. They had to be agile, meaning quick to adapt in 2020. But I did have a colleague I worked with, and he had some very good points about that same lowercase a situation created a movement towards capital A, agile, because healthcare is a relatively, certainly hospitals in healthcare are a relatively, risk-averse industry, where it's like, look, we need to plan out what we're doing. We have to plan out the project. We have to plan out the impact to the patients. We want to plan out the impact to the doctors, to the community, to all these different stakeholders, which is great. But when you got the COVID and you're shutting stuff down and whatever, you may not have time to do all that planning. And so his point was it wasn't just a lowercase a agile situation. It was a capital A agile situation. And so, having asked and you answered, is the waterfall method dead or should it be? And you said, well, it depends. Let me ask it this way: can they coexist? Meaning, can an organization adopt certain agile methodologies at the same time they are holding on to waterfall methodologies? Or does it really need to be, hey, whatever works for your team, sure, but it's one or the other?
Yeah, my professional advice is to pick one or the other. Now, it's okay to have like one department in an organization be agile, right? And one, still be doing waterfall, but you've got to cut the ties, right? Because the Agile way of working, it's really about changing the way you think about work, too. It's really about this, how you treat people, how you think about work, right? Like, let's try something, right? And if we fail, we fail, and that's okay, which is a mind shift, right? Who wants to fail at something at work, right? Because people are concerned about their image or their raise, right? And if you think about, most waterfall organizations are very structured, very hierarchical, right? And in the agile way of working, teams are really organized. There isn't a boss that sits on the team each day to tell the team, what they do. So if you're going to have a successful agile adoption, you have to have executive buy-in, and they have to accept the fact that if they truly want to be an agile company, the culture has to shift. So you really have to think about how you treat folks, right? Like, what are people's job titles now, right? Are we going to let people work flexible hours, right? Like, lots of companies that I've been at that really have a agile culture, it has a very different vibe. Like, there are no desks, like no offices, there's no cubes. Everyone sits in like each team has their own pod, right? And they've got like fun things on the wall. If they have conference room, they're all glass, right? Create this idea of being transparent. We're all on the same team. Nothing's happening behind closed doors, right? You can, go in and have a convo, right? It's about having, and these same companies, they have like what I call a nice happy space for their employees. They have ping pong tables, couches, right? Free snacks, but it's also appreciating their employees as well. Successful agile companies have a wonderful culture of appreciation. It might be happy hour in the office every other Friday, or it could mean once a month you take the afternoon off and you go do volunteer work somewhere near and dear to your heart, right?
Yeah.
I once worked at a firm, and I wasn't allowed in this one section because there were 3 software engineers back there, and this company did proprietary software, and if one of the employees had a thought about, hey, I think this would be really cool if our software did this. Well, they, it was kind of like a request box, right? So they, wrote out a card, stuck it in the box. And if the CIO thought, yeah, let's try that. Those 3 guys in that back room, they had 72 hours to stand it up.
Wow.
And they would push it out to their software platform and see what people said about it. That's agile, right? But that's an entirely different way to think about work, right?
It is. And do you think that some of the elements you mentioned about the layout of the workspace, the appreciation techniques, is that because, we hear about those with Google and tech. Yeah. Is this, you've seen this exclusively in tech, or you've seen non-tech organizations that were doing the same elements into their culture?
I have seen it in tech and non-tech.
Okay.
Spaces.
Interesting.
Well. Yeah. And if so the original Agile Manifesto is for software dev, right? But if you go out there and you do some research, there are Agile Manifestos for higher education, for marketing, for accounting, right? Like, more and more companies are seeing the value, because who are the experts in what a company does?
the customer, I guess. I mean,
their customer and their teams, right?
Sure.
So
yeah.
when you get those two people in the same room, like you hear what the customer wants, here's how a truly agile culture works. They say, okay, we have this customer. They want this, or they have this problem to solve. Go. They let the teams think about that, right? Because they bring that knowledge. If you think back to Waterfall, somebody else decides how it should be built.
Right.
Right? Someone else who has more experience, who has a certain title, right? And that might not be the best way. So it's really this way. And how I like to explain it is like, if you want to adopt the Agile mindset, which isn't easy, right? It's not easy to change the way you think, right?
Right.
But if you pick a type of Agile, so say you're going to pick Scrum, Scrum serves as the team's like a guardrails for their work, right? So there's certain Scrum practices that a team does throughout the sprint, right? And they're at they're like each day, right? You know, once a sprint, twice a sprint, like you, at the end of a sprint, you meet with your customer, you do a team retrospective. So you create this wonderful work cadence, right? Like, so you don't have to think about how you're going to get the work done, right? Because that Agile process you pick, it provides that structure. Right. I love Steve Jobs. I love him. And if you ever, hear things, with him, or you read blogs, he always wore the same thing. And he got asked that question a lot, right? He's like, well, it's all about decision fatigue, right?
Right.
And that's how I think about the Agile process, right? It takes that thinking out of teams, right? So if they're asked mid-project to shift gears or to change what they're working on, they don't have to focus on how they're going to get the work done. They know that their team works in 2-week sprints or a month sprints, right? Now they can really focus their thinking on the how piece, right? How are we now going to think about this work? And the Agile way of working prioritizes the work too, right? Like, let's talk about what are the most important parts that need to be done or built first, right? Let's get those out to the customer first, because sometimes if there's no prioritization, people pick the easy things first, right? And they may not add a whole lot of value. So if you have teams that are working in small increments of work that are the top priority, they're always going to deliver something that adds that value.
One of the things, so I'm thinking to my work, and one of the things that we are always talking through is, just because you talk about prioritization there, it made me think of this. There's always going to be new high priority items. And so low priority items, you feel like you have this risk of them just staying forever unworked on. Does Agile have, solutions for how do we handle that? And maybe that's based on the methodology, the Scrum or whatever methodology, but is there a way to deal with the fact that you don't want things to never be touched?
Yes. So again, I'll just talk about Scrum since it's what lots of
so popular,
companies use. And even if you use Kanban, it's all about there's a piece of that you use like a storyboard, story wall, right? Lots of, there's, lots of electronic ones, but that's where teams store their work, right? And
Sure.
there's a part of this Scrum process where you create what they call user stories, and each user story represents an increment of work, right? Some piece of work, something that needs done. And that's what gets prioritized, right? And I always coach folks. I said, create user stories. If you have a conversation with your customer and they have a thought, create a story. If you're talking with the person who sits next to you and you guys are like, yeah, like maybe we should try this, create a story, because you don't want that knowledge to get lost, because that's what happens. Things are
Right.
like, oh, hey, now we need this, now we need that. And so capturing the work really helps to maintain, hey, here's some of the things that we still need to do, right? And
Right.
teams should always have a goal, right? Like they should know what they're supposed to be working on. And so if that needs to change, then yeah, some of those lower priority stories, they might not be even needed anymore, or they might go up to the top of the
Okay.
list. But there's I love the small things about the Agile way of working that I think really helps teams to stay on track. And one of those things is called a focusing question. And
Okay.
when you start a new team or a new project, teams should write a focusing question. What are we set out to do, right? What is our goal? Because people get down in the weeds, don't they? Or they their minds just keep going down a rabbit hole. And
Yeah,
when they
you
come
spin
up
off
for
to some other topic.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you've spent all your time on this thing that you're not even supposed to be working on, right?
Yep.
And that's one of the ways too that the Agile process helps teams to get work done, is that each day most Agile teams meet for a 15-minute ritual called a stand-up. And they say, hey, here's what I did yesterday, here's what I'm working on today, and here's obstacles that have come up. And it helps keep people accountable for their work, but it also gets people talking about the work. So if you're talking about your work every day as a team, the team knows what everyone's working on, and you're constantly thinking about the work. And if you have someone who's going down that rabbit hole, you can be like, hey, back to the sprint work, right? Here's what we're supposed to be working on. Here's our, focusing question. And, it just, but with all that said, you have to have someone that's in charge of responsible for the prioritization, right? Like you have to have someone that says, team, based on our customer, right? Here's what we're going to do. Or, hey, our customer needs to shift, right? Now we need to work on this, because, if you don't have that voice, sometimes a team can't really find their way if things are constantly changing, right?
Yep.
So, and so there is a role about that, that really tries to help the team prioritize the work so they can focus on the work.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that what strikes me as I'm listening to you and learning about this is there seem to me to be a number of areas of Agile that share factors in common with the Toyota production methodology, aka Lean. And I don't know if any of your research has taken you into that realm where those Venn diagrams might overlap, or if you're familiar with Lean, but it just seems to me that there's a lot there, particularly like Lean has rapid improvement events that are usually 1 to 2 weeks long, right? Where you get a lot of work done and what would be, I suppose, the equivalent of an agile sprint. So is that something that you have researched anything into or that has jumped out at you as having similarities? And if so, the TPM and Lean are, I think, a little older, and they obviously came out of automotive manufacturing. But do you think that these are they in some way synonyms? Do they overlap? I mean, what are your thoughts on the conjunction of those two?
Well, you really have to recognize, right, that people have been thinking this way about work way longer than the Agile Manifesto.
Sure.
Some of my academic research, some people put the dart on the board at really thinking about the scientific method, right? Thinking about, making observations, doing an experiment, right? Making changes. And then if you kind of chart out, and I have created a timeline of the history of Agile, and it really kind of starts in the 1930s.
Okay.
So you really have Walter Hulshult, you put me on the spot here, Dave, of Bell Labs.
Stuart Deming, probably.
Yeah, really thinking about continuous improvement. And then you've got, Edwards.
Yeah, I think
Deming?
Yeah, yep. Deming. Yep.
Put me on the spot again here,
Nope,
right?
Sorry, yep.
And so you can see that thinking, right? Like we need to like this thinking of like reflecting on the process and making changes so we can be more efficient, right? So we can produce more, right? How do we make our process more effective, right? And then you kind of really get into Lean and Toyota, right? Like they're really kind of some of the basic blocks to the Agile way of thinking, right? So so you'll see lots of research out there about Lean and Agile, but where they and I've even seen the Venn diagram you're talking about. You've got Lean and Agile and kind of where they meet, but so they're both about continuous improvement, thinking, how can we improve things? How can we produce things faster? I think one of the biggest factors that separates them is really the Lean concept of eliminating waste, right? Yeah. So I think that's
key
really where
key. I mean,
right. So I think that's really where that departure occurs, right? Because the Agile process is really about helping people think about work, right, and more of a incremental structure,
right?
And and stopping to make changes. They're not really focused on waste.
Okay.
Like process waste, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think the point of taking it back almost to the scientific method and the observe and experiment and so forth is a great metaphor for what so many modern continuous improvement endeavors and initiatives are about, and some of the tie-ins to Agile are very interesting to think about, and probably would require more depth and time than we have today. So let me pivot. Those are some of the things we need to do Agile right. What do companies get wrong about Agile?
They implement the process piece. So they pick a Agile flavor, right? They pick Scrum, they pick XP, whatever it is.
Cookies and cream. Yeah, whatever.
Right. Well, right. Cookies and cream, right? Whatever. And And they just expect their folks they expect to have the promising results of their teams working in Agile by only implementing the process piece. They forget about people, and Agile is about people. People are the heart and soul of the Agile process. And I think, let me tie that back to something that I was going to say, and we got off topic. But the 4 Agile values out of the Agile Manifesto, they're about people. So the 4 values are individuals and interactions over processes and tools, right? Let's put people first and how we talk, how we work, right? Working software, or now you can say like working product, working service, over comprehensive documentation. So instead of that 300-page requirement doc, let's create something that we can talk about, right? Number 3 is customer collaboration over contract negotiation, right? Let's be engaged with our customers. Now, you still have to have contracts, right? So I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying no more contracts, no more requirement docs, because you have to have those things. You have to have processes and tools, right? But they're not the main focus, which is the mind shift from a waterfall. So number 4 is responding to change over following a plan. So you can really see how the Agile flips kind of the kind of tenets of working in waterfall, right? Like, big requirement documentations, project plans, right? Like, it's not about people. It's about, let's follow this process and get, tools done, right? That kind of thing. But so it's about people, right? Individuals and how they interact, people working together to create a product, interacting with your customer and responding to change, which means you have to listen. You have to hear what your customers say, right? Instead of saying, don't you mess with my Microsoft project plan that took me 2 weeks to make, right? Like that thing.
My source of truth, yeah. Yeah,
I used to create those, like, right? Like, don't you dare ask me to change this thing, right? And so companies that don't quite get the Agile results they're after is that they don't make that mindset shift, right? And the Agile way of working really provides teams with tools to interact. And that's what's been missing out of teams that work for a long time, is that we've had no tools to help us interact with our colleagues. And just let me tell a quick story. But so one practice of Agile teams is writing like a team working agreement or a team contract, right? Like, what do we value as a team? How are we going to work as a team? What are our core working hours? All of those types of things, right?
Right.
And so if you have someone on the team who arrives every day to your 9 a.m. call late, he's 5 to 10 minutes late every day. Well, if no one talks about that, what's going to happen? Like, what happens?
Keep going.
Yeah, they'll keep going, and they dislike that person a bit more every time they're late, right? They're like, oh, he's late again. He's late again. Like, everybody else is here on time. Well, at some point, it's going to hit the fan. It's going to explode, right? Like, someone's going to have a bad day, like their dog peed on the car, the kids are on the rug, like the school bus was late, there was traffic, they didn't have time to get coffee, and they're going to let that teammate have it. Like, I'm tired of you, right? And that doesn't help anyone. But the Agile way, if you have a team working agreement or a team social contract, I can say, hey, Our contract for our team says that we all show up on time. I've seen that you haven't, like, you're always 5 or so minutes late. Like, is there like a carpool problem with the kids, or like have you changed routes because of construction? Should we talk about it as a team? Like, do we need to talk about maybe changing the time of that call, right? But if there's no contract in place, there's no means to have that conversation. And the Agile way of working has all of these types of, rituals, artifacts that help teams, right?
Right.
Think back to that Agile storyboard that shows all of the work. Well, you can talk about the work. No one's hiding any work, right? Like, I can ask folks, hey, what are you doing? Or, what's up with that, right? It's all right there. And it helps folks to really kind of get past some of the soft skill stuff to really, work as a team. And so companies that don't take the time to implement that shift sometimes don't see great results, or companies that don't want to give thought power to the team, right? So if they still have directors and executives saying, here's what you will do and here's how.
Right, top down.
Right. If it's still very much so top down, you're not going to see that Agile mindset flourish.
That's okay. So is Agile non-compatible with more hierarchical structures? Do you have to flatten an administrative structure within an organization for Agile to work? Just to that last point about top down, or is it really more about, it's not that it's not compatible, but it's more about just the culture? You can have your hierarchy, but who's directing the work and how it has to be more self-directed from a cultural aspect. Is that more of it, would you say? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, you are understanding it correct. Actually, right now, I am helping to transform teams in the United States Air Force that are not tech teams.
Okay.
Which is a very top-down, right? So it's really about the teams who are, who do all of the work. It's allowing them to work in an Agile way. It's really coaching their executive team on, what it means, right? And allowing them to be part of that solution process, right? Mm-hmm. Now, right? And so, no, you don't necessarily have to take away the structure of an organization, but you have to change how people give orders, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you have to have more servant leaders.
That's interesting. A couple of years ago, I read General Stanley McChrystal's book, Team of Teams, talking about how he came in and tried to push cultural and structural changes in the face of where we were in struggling to root out, the terrorists in Iraq. And he went on to some situations in Afghanistan that led to him retiring. But I think his success in Iraq was widespread and a strong success. And his book is really fascinating about empowering people to act on operations without having to run up the chain of command, to go talk to the general, to go talk to whoever before they got permission, to go get a bad guy, we'll say. And so what's fascinating to me is sitting here and connecting the dots a bit with some of what you're talking about, that you're doing it with the Air Force, but with civilian organizations, programming companies, tech companies, hospitals, whomever, doing similar things to break down how they delegate and decide upon the work to be done. And I'm not sure what all the ramifications are like for my industry, for healthcare. I'd have to sit and ponder for a while, I think. But I think there could be many implications for that. And I know particularly, again, who knows what phrase we should use, but post-COVID, I've heard from and talked to a lot of doctors and nurses that feel very strongly that, at least at some organizations, bureaucracies and administration were in the way of taking care of patients during COVID. And so, okay, how do we take that feedback from those caregivers, the potential methodologies of lean, the lessons learned from people like yourself, from General McChrystal, from whomever who's gone through this in other industries, and make our industry my industry more agile with a capital A.
No, but that's a fantastic statement, because my latest academic paper is about using the Agile mindset to improve person-centered care at an Ohio nursing home. And this research was born during COVID, because they have a 90 question, and I'm not a healthcare expert. This is not my field, but this is what I've learned from my research colleagues. But they have like a 90 question intake form, right? When they get someone new to the nursing home, that's all about what they like, what kind of foods they like, what types of things do they like to do, like what time, do they get up and, go to bed and that type of thing. But during COVID, you can't sit in a room with someone and ask them 90 questions.
Right.
Right. So our research it kind of started there, perhaps we prioritize those 90 questions. Which one should we ask first? Right. I don't know, 5 must-haves or something. Right.
Yeah.
So instead of not asking them at all, right, let's prioritize these. And then it just, changed and, morphed. But it's really about thinking, because it's hard to change people's working habits. I always ask all 90 questions at the same time, right? If that's my job. That's right. That's, what I do. Well, so it's hard to say, no, you ask, these 10, and then you can go on to the next task. So sometimes it's really about helping people to see their work, right? As well.
Yeah. And okay, so we've been talking for just under an hour.
Okay.
And we've been talking about Agile, and to some extent, the subtext, I would say, of our conversation has been from the perspective of a project manager, a leader, a operations manager, whatever. Why would the average person care? Why does Joe, the forklift driver, why does Susie, the grocery store stocker, who puts the vegetables out there for us to all buy and eat and comb over and take samples or whatever, why do they care about Agile? Do they care about Agile?
Well, if they work in a company that is Agile or that does certain practices, because you don't have to call it Agile. So I sometimes coach companies that want to implement certain Agile practices, but they are very shy to call it. We're going to do something new. So I have a colleague of mine that calls it stealth Agile. Well, just do some of the Agile practices. That'll have a big impact, right? So sometimes you'll see teams or organizations that'll do like a 15-minute meeting every day with their teams, right? Well, that's Agile. Or at the end of a project, they'll do like a retrospective, right, about it. So if you work in that type of culture, then it means a lot to you, because then that person who does the work every day, right? So if you have someone who is, stocking shelves every day, if they think of a way to do it better or faster or that will bring more value to their customers, they should have the confidence to share that with their team, with their team lead or their boss, right? So they should, because that's where the best thoughts come from, or the people who, do the work every day, right?
Right.
So you want to have a culture that has some type of mechanism for helping employees with that, right? So it could be a suggestion box on the wall. It could mean like, hey, let's meet Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 15 minutes before our shift, right? Let's talk about, right, what's going well, what's not, right? Those types of things. So you can implement, right, practices that can help your teams.
But to your point earlier, if I'm an employee who is working in a place that perhaps has done some of those tools, but they're not actually doing anything with it. They've got the suggestion box and they haven't ever done a single suggestion, or they have these daily huddles and nothing comes from the huddles, then they're not really agile. And so to somebody who's in a position like that, I don't know that it's so much, I asked, why does it matter to them? In a situation like that, it may not matter to them, except insofar as knowing that some companies are agile, and maybe you need to, if you have the voice, advocate for it in your company. But if you don't have that voice, maybe you need to seek out, I'm not telling anybody to quit their job, but maybe you need to seek out an organization that's agile, since there's so much evidence of the value that agile brings to the modern enterprise. Is that fair enough to say, do you think?
That is fair enough to say. And I would also like to add that even if you don't work for a agile company, if you're aware of those 12 agile practices, the 12 agile principles that are connected to the Agile Manifesto, you can change how you act at work. And people will start to notice, right, how you talk about your work and how you treat your colleagues as well. So you can be agile yourself, right? Just in the way you think about work and how you think about interacting with your colleagues.
That's interesting. So that might be sort of a career tip we can end on is, and I never thought about that, the idea of the individual as, would you call yourself earlier, an agilist?
Agilist. Mm-hmm.
So the individual as an agilist, even in an organization that is not itself agile, you believe, or may even have done research on this, will yield career dividends because of they will have better productivity, they'll have better output, whatever the case might be. So if you're out there and you're listening and want to rise in your career, go research these items and then try to live them every day. Is that,
right. That's exactly what I'm saying. And that starts in my research in higher ed with teaching faculty at higher ed institutions how to be agile in the way they teach and the way that they manage their classrooms, right? So they may not work for a department that's agile or even knows what it is, but there's agile practices and agile principles that they can use themselves that'll have a significant impact on what they do, either from a teaching perspective, from a research lab perspective. I know a faculty member who runs her entire research lab using Scrum and Agile.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time today, and I am grateful for the research you're doing, because I think that as the pace of change in the world speeds up, we all have to do our best to keep up. So I think that some of the things you're researching are going to help organizations do that, and particularly my industry, I think, needs to work hard to keep up, as we've talked to. And I'm glad that we ended on some specific advice that people can look into and research and try to use to help themselves. So if somebody wants to find more of your papers, your info, to contact you, where should they reach out? Do you have some socials you want to, promote or anything like that? How do people get a hold of you?
I'm very easy to get a hold of. You can just look me up on my website, boldlyagile.com.
Boldlyagile.com.
Yeah, it has links to all of my research, contact info, blogs that I like, those types of things.
All right. Well, thank you very much again for coming on with me to No Bad Questions, Dr. Hulshult.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It was fun, Dave. Thanks.